Welcome to The One Inside, an internal family systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. On today's podcast, I chat with Justin Martin about mental health and men's issues. Hey everyone. I am so excited to share this podcast with you about men's issues with Justin Martin. Justin is an IFS therapist in Florida. He's been IFS informed for a few years and is finishing up his level 1 training. We talk about all things men. I so appreciate Justin's openness and vulnerability and sharing his personal examples with us. We cover men's competitive parts, messages that men get throughout their life. We talk about dating, nice guys, the term toxic masculinity, authenticity, and attachment. We end with Justin sharing several of his writings, which are so vulnerable and intimate. Justin's website is partsofmetherapy.com. You can also find Justin at the same name, Parts of Me Therapy, on Instagram. As always, I would love to connect with you. I also am on Instagram at IFS Tammy. You can also find me on Twitter and Clubhouse and on the One Inside Facebook page. You can find past episodes and keep in touch with me. Join my email list at tammysollenberger.com. I so love hearing from you. So, this is episode 94. We are making our way to episode 100. I am excited to do that. And we've got a couple guys with some books coming out. So I know I've gotten several messages about when's such and such going to be on, and such will be on soon. The big guy, he's got a book coming out soon, and he will be on soon. I promise. So we're making our way to 100, and then we will take a break for the summer. Hope everyone's doing well, and I will talk to you soon. Enjoy.
Hi, Tammy.
Hey, Justin. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
I did want to say thank you too, because I know we were talking about how I'm kind of a little new on my IFS journey, even though I've I don't know how to explain it. Just made sense of it for a long time, and then when I found it, it was like, that makes that epiphany moment. I think a lot of IFS therapists have.
Yes, yes.
But it was so nice too, because when a part of me was just consuming as much information, you were one of the first people I found with a
Aw.
podcast. So I
Oh, that's good
appreciate
to
all the work.
hear. Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, that's part of it, right? Like it's part of just putting it out there is that we have this amazing message that is really organic, but it's sort of not being taught or told. But then when people hear about it, they're like, "Oh, that makes so much
Right.
sense."
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I hear that makes so much sense, and this explains everything. Like that seems to be the two
Right.
sentences that we hear. Either I've said it or I hear it like over and over.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk to you today about men's issues because I was thinking about this last night and I thought basically what happens is I just have all the people that I want to talk to on the podcast. So we don't talk about men's issues because I'm like, no, thank you.
Right.
So we talk a lot about food.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm super excited because I'm like, oh, right, this isn't just about me. There's a part of me that's like, oh, I guess we should talk about other things. So,
Yeah. Well, and too, I'd be curious to hear if your parts want to share too what your experience has been like, with this at all once we talk about it, because it's men's issues. I don't think are confined to just the space with us, because a lot of it also has to do with us interacting with other people too, and so
yeah,
yeah.
with girls.
Yes. Hmm.
Well, why don't we just start off with just letting everybody know where you are in the world and what you would see if you looked out your nearest window.
It's so funny because I knew you were going to ask that, and I just took the trash out like literally before I hopped on here. And so here in Orlando, Florida, it's kind of like this dreary, overcast day, but the wind feels good, which normally I don't like this time of the year in Florida. It's about to get really hot, and and so just feeling that wind, even if it's overcast, I'll take it any day of the week.
Yeah.
Um, and then just outside my window, nothing too exciting. There's another house right there outside of my office, but if you go a little bit further, there's a nice pond area that I'll sometimes go to and sit down and read a book. And so, yeah, I would say that that's probably the scenery that's closest to me.
Can you see a palm tree out your window?
No, but there's plenty of them here. There's plenty of them here, and I grew up in a city that was it's south of Orlando. It's called Port St. Lucie, and it's not far from the beach. So occasionally, parts of me will miss the beach because Orlando's kind of central in Florida.
Yeah.
Um, but it's good to know that it's there if I need to go and
Yeah.
soak up some palm trees and some sun.
Yeah. Especially when it's crazy hot. Do you have season passes to Disney World?
I do not, and I probably should. So especially with like COVID and everything, I stayed away from the theme parks and stuff for a while. But um, I did do this one thing. I graduated from UCF with my master's a few years back, and they had this nice thing where one time out of the year, UCF students got to go to Universal for free, and it was during the night when the park was shut down. So I would always do that every year with buddies of mine, and that was always so fun. But I do think too, when you live in Orlando, you experience theme park fatigue, and everyone else is probably like, "Oh, that'd be nice to have, wouldn't it?"
Eh, right.
but 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 yeah, and I think I've gotten out of that fatigue, and it's now like, all right, I haven't been in a while. I need to go back.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm from Maryland originally, and I remember someone saying, and really close to DC, I remember someone saying something about, yeah, you probably go to DC all the time. And I was like, no, like, I don't, right. It's like right there, but you're like, oh, have you done this monument and this monument? And I'm like, yeah, well, in field trips in school, we would go to the monuments, but otherwise, like, it's right there. So it's not like you go do that stuff.
Right. Yeah, I had a friend come visit. She had never been here, and we went out to Orlando, and I was like, where am I going to take this person? Just all around it. And as I was visiting with her, I was like, I don't do this enough, and I live here.
I know. That's what
So,
happens though, right? You're like
yeah,
play tourist in your own town is a
right.
good thing.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep,
So tell me about, I guess I'm curious if you want to start with just like what you said, like how you came to find IFS, and your own experience with IFS, and or how men's issues became like so important to you. Like, which sounds
right.
stupid as a man. I think that's kind of like a stupid question to ask you, but I guess I'll ask you.
It's a good question, and I have a nuanced answer for that because this is still very, I think, too very new for me. Even though I've internalized it a lot and made sense of it in my head, actually communicating the message is still new to me. So it's a great question. How I found IFS, and also the journey that I kind of went through myself, and I'm still going through, is when I was in grad school. I have a part of me that loves to pick at theories. And just as I was navigating that space of what theory I'd like to really use a lot, this part of me was like, well, I hate CBT because I'm never going to use it with a grieving person. I'm never going to say challenge that irrational thought. Like it would just go awful. And then I would find another therapy modality and say, well, that doesn't work in this case, right? And out of this frustration and also curiosity, I was looking for something that just seemed to work with a lot of people and a lot of issues, but also felt true to me. And before I found IFS, I was literally thinking about doing research on this, and it relates to men's issues, which was I used to play sports. I in grad school, I played flag football, just not seriously, but it scratched the competitive itch for me. And what was so interesting to me was I was going through my grad school program as a therapist, and I would notice that when I was on the football field, something about that culture, that environment, the way that the game is played would tap into something within me that I didn't show anywhere else. To the point even where I would have therapist colleagues of mine want to come watch me play, and I would tell them, "Don't, because it's gonna challenge everything that you think about me." And and
Wait a minute.
yeah,
So
go ahead.
what would someone see if they went to the football field and watched you? What
I I have a part of me that's very competitive, and I obviously don't let that part of me out in therapy and
right.
and also in classroom
In
settings.
classes, right,
Yeah,
right.
and so, the therapists that saw me there thought, "Oh, Justin's really insightful." They saw those parts of me, but they didn't see these parts of me, right? And I say all that because I actually, before I even found IFS, got curious as to that part of me is very good at football. It's very good, and I call on it a lot. And there was times in the past, but as I kind of got more curious, I'm like, if that part of me ran the show in other areas of my life, this would go very bad. Like this
Wow.
this wouldn't go well. And it did for a while, even prior to grad school.
Hmm.
And and then when I found IFS, it helped me put language to that dynamic that I didn't previously have. Like I was telling you, I knew it, but like I then what all the pieces kind of put together, like, oh, that's a part of me.
Yeah.
That's a part of me. And even when I explore that part of me, it's an energy. It's this feeling of being in control of and I then when I found IFS, I'm like, yeah, this relates to a lot of some of the clients' parts that I'm working with, just not in a sports context.
Mm.
And and then as I was able to kind of trace it back through my childhood history, I was like, ah, this makes sense how this part came to have this job
Mm.
and how it performs on the field. Um, and that kind of led me down to just being curious about, I wonder if other men identify with that. And what's funny, whenever a man asks me what I do in therapy, I always use that analogy because sometimes that's the thing that actually gets them to be like, I totally get what you're saying.
I love it. Yeah, I love that. And it sounds like that would really speak to men. Like if you're like, well, we talk about feelings,
Right.
that's probably not going to do it. But they might really resonate that, right? Because they're going to subgroup that part. Like, yes, I have to act this way in class, or even like little boys, right? Like I have to act this way in class, but then on the football field or the baseball field, these parts of me that can come out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think too, just us understanding that if that's the invitation that gets them in, great, because that's often the challenge is the language that we use with men. Oftentimes their protectors are like, no, I'm not gonna do that. Feelings, no. Like that's and so some way to offer respect to even those parts, but also curiosity to that this is an invitation, um, I think is super important. And I'm still navigating that as a pitch that I give to men should they want it.
Do you want to talk about men's protective parts and even like little boys' protective parts? You probably know that I have a 10-year-old. I don't know if you know that or not, but
Yeah.
I'm like, and so I think about that for him and how it starts so young about boys and the messages they receive, which then makes it hard to get men to come to therapy. But it starts with when they're little boys.
Right. It's such a complex issue of like, I think us as men, like what you were talking about, and even boys, it starts very young. This idea, this messaging that we have to reject any type of femininity. I don't even know if I said that right.
Yeah.
Anything feminine, we need to
Yeah.
reject and uphold this idea of what it's like to be masculine. And I think the paradox that young boys go through um, is that when the whole system around them is this way and they know that they're not, that in itself is isolating And it's almost this push-pull of, I either get to be authentically me and get rejected by the other boys, or adhere to the system, in which case I reject a part of myself.
Wow.
And that complexity is, I think, what boys and men are dealing with all the time. And it's it's such a nuanced way to approach it, because it's like, how do we then change the system?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I hope that's what IFS and other male therapists can do, is bring this systems oriented approach to a larger system, so that men won't have to feel like choosing between one of those two things.
Yeah. Mm. That's beautiful. Um, and do you want to say a little bit about how that shows up in dating? When we talk about relationships, have that as part of our list of things to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can also speak too for like the paradox that I felt I was going through. Sometimes still go through. I'm single, so when I go out and date, sometimes I still have parts of me that have this messaging. And it only hasn't been till recently that I was even aware of that. But like, even in dating, I think men are, if you go look at any guy's dating coach, I feel like the messaging that they just give is like, how to be the top percent man, the 3% man, how to put yourselves higher than everybody else so that you can attract any woman that you want. And men gravitate towards that message because they want connection, but what they don't understand is that idea of pushing yourselves higher and higher is a protective part of them that isn't just subject to men, right? Other people have parts like that too. But the messaging then of like, I need to put myself there so that I can attract someone and feel loved. And that's a message that I think a lot of men can identify with. And again, it creates this paradox of, well, what happens if you're not there?
Mm,
And the shame in that. And so I relate it to IFS because, with IFS, we're always asking protectors, what would happen if you didn't do that, right?
hmm.
To hear about the fear and maybe lead towards an exile. And if you ask men what would happen if you weren't successful, listen to their answers. It's never like, oh well, that'll be okay. It's well, then I wouldn't be able to attract anybody. I'd be a loser. I'd be, this, that, and then that always gets me curious of like, where's that message? Where did that burden get picked up?
Yeah.
Who's carrying that? And then to relate it to dating, here's how it shows up, and this is how it showed up for me. I Early on, I would adhere to those messages, and it was like, you've got to be the guy that is polarizing. You've got to be the guy that sweeps her kind of off her feet, and in that way you can attract as many women as you want. And that has to do with your lifestyle, how you dress, the your hobbies, all of these things. And then there was always, I literally tested this out. I asked other men and women, how do you view like the first kiss on a date? What should happen? And here's the paradox of the answers that I would get even from women, which is, I want men to initiate the first kiss. They need to do that, right?
Hmm.
And that's fine if that's what they want. But then there were other women that would say, like, he needs to respect my boundaries and ask about that. And
Right.
then here I sat, I was like, well, which one is it?
Right.
But even more so than answering that question, I think then what happens is, then it's no wonder that a lot of men have anxiety about dating. And then their only answer to anxiety about dating is these messages that other men are passing down. You got to work through that and just do it. Just do it. And then we wonder why too then women are upset to us about crossing their boundaries. And And I say all that because there's a way, I think, as men do inner work where you can be, I don't know if the word's assertive, but authentic to what you want while also respecting another person's boundaries. And
Yeah.
so something like that in a practical way, I think that men can do. But to me, this is more, if you say it but you don't actually feel it, people can pick up on that too. But like I've gotten into the habit of like the balanced, nuanced answer for that for me is like when I'm dating, if I really wanted to kiss somebody, I could say something like, I really want to kiss you right now. And then they can choose what to do with that, what they want. And in that way, I'm still being authentic to what I want without pushing someone else's boundaries. Um, and seeing if they want to meet me there. It also kind of allows me to embrace, if you want to call it masculine, that masculine part of me that's confident in wanting this, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it also, I think, respects women and what they may or may not want. But to me, that comes with inner work because you can say that, but also not feel it. But once you do that inner work, I think you're more comfortable with, you know, Dick Schwartz and all of everybody IFS talks about the thing with IFS that's nice is just having the freedom and choice to be able to differentiate and still hold on to you and your parts no matter what that other person's answer is. And to me, that's what men need. They need to be able to do that inner work so they can say things like that, mean it, and also be comfortable with whatever person's reaction that is.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question,
Yeah,
but
no, it's beautiful. No, so much is coming up for me as you're talking. One thing that I was thinking is that, well, I guess two things. I was thinking, gosh, it's got to be a lot of work to be a guy. That sounds like a lot of work. Like that you can't just be authentic. Like it seems like you have to be like, here's how I have to date. I don't know that women go through that. I don't know. I have no idea about dating,
right.
um but yeah, I don't hear women say that. And so I'm thinking, gosh, poor men. Sort of that idea that you have to do these things. And my guess is to do the things to be the 3% aren't like be in touch with your feelings. They're
Right.
more like success, be masculine, be confident, be this like tough guy. I'm pretending to be a tough guy with my shoulders and my hands. This is my tough guy posture. And so yeah, so I'm guessing that that's actually the opposite of authenticity.
Yeah, it's that we are in our own way because of this messaging exiling parts of us to adhere to the culture and the group. And to answer your question, it's hard being a guy. There are aspects that it is hard, but there's also tremendous privilege too that I don't discount either, right? And I was listening to Esther Perel and I think his name's Justin Baldoni. He came out with a book about masculinity. He's an actor, and they said something that was so profound to me because when you look at it as a cultural level, I do see this is true. This is true, and Esther was talking about, or maybe it was Justin saying, why is it that now we're just now starting to have these conversations as men? Why is it taken so long? And Esther's answer, which I think is true, is part of this has to do with the courage of women in that as they have kind of broken the glass ceiling that some men have put on them, it has forced men to look at, I am something different than my job now because someone who I didn't think could do this job is now doing it.
Mm,
Right. And
mhm,
so those protectors in men that didn't really have to, like Dick talks about, life kind of breaks us through our protective shield. In that case, I see that happening with men, and that we're in a way being forced to look at things that maybe we didn't want to in generations past. And that can be very scary for protective parts in men. But I do think that there is hope in that sometimes, if that's what brings somebody into therapy, the offering is there's a better way of going about things if you're willing to try it from the IFS perspective, giving that invitation. Um, and so, yeah, I have hope, and I also understand that the state of med needs some help too. So
Well, but doesn't it make sense though that if little boys learn really early on, I have to choose. I have to choose either to sort of fit in with the crowd or fit in with my dad or fit in with my uncles or fit in with my grandfather. I have to I have to do that or choose that like those emotions or that vulnerability or whatever that is. And so I have to make that choice and then that becomes just our normal way of being. Like we don't really even realize the sort of you grow up like that and that feels really normal. And then they're not that doesn't shift until there's been sort of shock out of it. Like a
Yeah.
shock out of it with what you're saying is happening with women and the courage of women or some sort of life crisis, which I think often brings men to therapy, whether it's like there's, either a job crisis or a loss of a job or some sort of, relationship issue that will often, something outside of them will bring them into therapy.
Yeah. Yeah, and what you're saying reminds me of, I don't know if you've heard of Gabor Mate, and he has a great video, which is children often have to choose between attachment and authenticity. And not just men, but everybody goes through that debacle. And then as they grow up, that wherever you kind of fell on that depends on what kind of your behaviors are. And that's exactly what we're talking about, that men at an early age have to choose between the attachment to the group or the authenticity. And being put in that place is very difficult for especially a young boy who who is just trying to find himself
Yeah.
in the world. And so yeah, I really hope that we can, all of us collectively, start to heal so that messages like that, that people won't have to choose between that, but that has to do with our cultural stressors, the stressors of parenting. Just,
What about nice guys? Because that was on our list too, and I thought, "Oh, this is interesting."
yeah,
Tell me
yeah.
about nice
I'm
guys.
super passionate about the term nice guys. um, Partly because I identified a part of myself that got messaging like that, which is, and it's in the male community, but it's also, I think, too, some women have passed that message on to us too. I know I've gotten it where, like, early on, especially when I was just navigating dating, I would get a message from somebody saying, well, you're just too nice for me. Right. And I would be like, well, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Right. And sometimes it's not up to the other person to give us that answer. But when you hear messaging like that all the time, and then you're struggling for connection or authenticity, or not authenticity, but love, and then even though this may not be true, you see other guys that are bravado, and they seemingly, even though it may not be true, seemingly have more women and look like they are more attached and loving, then I think parts of you then go, well, maybe I should just turn into that.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe I should just, and again, it's back to that dynamic of maybe I should change to the group, right?
Mm,
And I read this book. It was called No More Mr. Nice Guy, and while the premise is good, I do think his way out of nice guy syndrome is very managerial parts, like just do this, do that, and I don't really adhere to that. I more of like, let's explore where these parts got messages, and help these kind of wounded places that we have. But in his book, though, I will say it was he, and I recognize this in the past with myself too. What happens with, I don't like the label, but nice guys, is they're people pleasers, and so they will adhere to the people around them, but there's another part of them that really then starts to get angry at the fact that they're doing that.
mm,
And so what will happen is everything will seem kosher, if you will, and then uh, that anger will just explode. And it's funny because in the book, the couples therapist would say, I have wives come into me and look at their husbands and go, I would have rather married an asshole, because at least then I would know what I'm getting all the time. With you, it's like Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, you
mm.
and at the time I recognized that within myself, but now that I've found IFS, I've been like, oh, that makes so much more sense. There are multiple parts kind of doing this just to try and get what they want, right? And
Yeah.
so one part feels if I just go along with this, I'll get loved. And then when that doesn't work, then the other part comes in and says, that won't work. Guess what? Time for me to scream. And that'll come up.
Yeah.
And then it leaves the other person going, what in the world's going on with this guy? Right.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's the way I conceptualize it. We have different labels and terms for things, but I that's the way that I see it. And to me, the best way is to, again, using IFS is to work with those different parts.
No, I think that makes such sense, and I actually use that phrase all the time, and I'm often wrong. I'm like, "Oh, he seems like such a nice guy. Oh, he's a nice guy," and then, turns out not super nice, or parts of them.
Hmm.
But I think that too, like the with men, and I think that this is true for women. Sort of, there's the two types of women. Like this is in the country song, right? There's the type you take home to your mama, and then there's the other type. And so I think that's sort of the same thing that you get with men. There's like the a hole who all the girls want to date, and gets all the he gets all the women, and then there's the nice guy who's like the puppy dog friend, and you pat on the head. And then
Yes.
there's that messaging I think that we all get, and I think probably especially men get growing up, is there are these 2 types, and, like, who wants to be that? Like, who wants to be the nice guy?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I want to be in the middle. Like, I think and this isn't just to do with men. This is for everybody. But like I heard this. It was a woman's dating coach, and he said it's a guy. He's very popular. His name's Matthew Hussey. He's like, what women want is a nice guy with an edge. And most women, everybody in the room was like, yes, 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 yes. Where are they? Where are these men? Right. And but the way that I look at that is like, okay, you can say edge, but somebody who's compassionate, but that's also not a pushover. Somebody
Mm,
who is ambitious, but also like not doesn't overdo it.
mm,
Balance. And I think that that's what we offer in IFS is when protectors are on totally one side, there's another protector that tries to balance out the system. And what if you could balance that, right?
yeah,
And and so and
mm,
I don't think that's but see people say that's just men, but I can speak for myself. I want that in women too. To me, just the the way that the system, the couple kind of works, and I think this is important for men too, is like I want to be able to know that whatever roles or parts of us that are going to do the roles for this couple is mutually agreed upon, but that also that it's not the weight of the world on that part of me. And so I look at like I would love to provide for my family, but I also don't want someone who just then expects it's my job to do it. Right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah,
that freedom to me has a lot to do with the inner work of the two people coming together. And yes, maybe somebody is the provider, but the expectation that it needs to be you, to me, is more messaging being passed down to other
mm,
people. And people can feel that, like
yeah,
and I think that's what creates unbalance in a lot of relationships.
mm,
And so to me, the more differentiated. I love that word, and it's a very clinical word. So like I'll tell podcast listeners what it means, but that's actually how I found IFS. I found a theory prior to that that was about differentiation with sex and couples. And the idea of differentiation is the ability to hold on to yourself in the presence of others. And to me, if you get two people that can do that in a relationship, then it's a beautiful thing. And we
mm,
can then talk about roles that we may or may not be in or that may not work for one of us or both of us and have those conversations. And I think the way that you go about that is by doing some inner work, each person.
and speaking for your parts, right? Like,
Yeah,
if you can stay in that middle and then speak for the parts that are happening, right? The part of you that feels like you have to, there's this huge expectation, this pressure to be providing, and then the part of your spouse or your girlfriend who is feeling like that's what you need to do for whatever reason, or yeah, yeah. So sort of speaking for our parts, help us stay in this sort of grounded, differentiated way when I can speak to the parts. I think speaking to the parts helps me, I would say it that way. Speaking for my parts helps me stay grounded and in self and more differentiated.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
making sense? Okay. I'm like, is that right?
I agree. Yeah, it's I think that speaking for your parts, communication, activity, or I don't know if it's activity, just that way of being is so helpful for people. And I think, like what you said, it leads to us being differentiated. It leads to us being emotionally available for others.
Do you want to say anything about toxic masculinity?
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about the word. I hate the word toxic now. I feel like it's a buzzword that everybody uses. I know you're on Instagram, and I'm on Instagram too. And if I see another Instagram post, it's like 10 signs that your partner is a toxic narcissist. Part of me is going to explode. um, no, I just say that because it's like so nuanced. Like, I'm not discounting the bad parts of masculinity and the effect that it has on some people or what people look at as masculinity. But then I also ask, how do we get more men in? And I don't know if it's with further shaming.
Yeah, yeah. Mm,
And I also understand, easy for me to say I'm the guy, right? I'm not the, like, I totally get that. But it's a question that I am curious about, is like, what can we do to get more men in here? And I don't know if it's saying you need to work on your toxic masculinity, but more so other men that have done the inner work being curious and also courageous enough to approach those men, and when they're acting wrong, be courageous enough to tell them that, but also invite the curiosity to let their protectors know that I get what you're going through, and also that invitation of, if we could do it another way, would you want to?
mm,
Because I think what I hear from most men, and it makes sense in IFS, is that they're tired of having to be men all the time. And that relates perfectly to IFS, because what do we say about managers and protective parts? A lot of times they're very tired in doing the jobs that they're doing, but they feel like they have to do it.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
the same exact messaging I think that men experience. And
yeah,
so, how do we work with protectors? I think that's also similar to how we work on a systemic level with men,
yeah,
which is not saying you're toxic. It's, I think, other men offering the safe space for those men to be feel invited enough to come do that inner work with them.
yeah,
Um, that's my perspective. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. That's the way I've been approaching it. Um, because I think about myself, and I think about, if back, especially when I had protective parts very entrenched in me, if somebody would have said that to me, I would have been like, yeah, okay, you know.
Well, I think it maybe it speaks to us, first of all, not understanding that we're all multiple, right? Like, not like just, that, right, there are parts of men that are toxic, which I'm putting in air quotes, and then also not understanding what happens for little boys and how those parts get developed and how those parts are protective and how they've needed to develop those parts in order to survive, in order to function. And I think when we understand that system, the inner system, then we could be more curious and compassionate towards the parts of men that are um, toxic, in air
Mhm.
quotes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's that's what I hope for, because I really think that there's a benefit for everybody involved if
Yeah.
we go about it that way. Um, so, but again, I
Yeah.
also too welcome other opinions, because I understand that I by no means have this figured out.
Um, so okay, so there's a part of me that wonders if you feel like you have to say that because as a man, when you say something, often the people around you or even women are like, when you say something, then because you're a white man, then it's just okay, you
Yes.
said it. So now you have a part that feels like it has to say, "I'm open to other opinions."
Right. Yeah. I that's exactly how I feel because this again is a difficult space for me and my parts to navigate a lot of times. And sometimes it's like there's pushback from other people of like, well, easy for you to say. You don't experience what I experience. And they're absolutely right. And I also too understand, like as I mentioned to you before, I'm very new to just even talking about this.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes it feels safer for me and my experience to preface or end with that so that I could also hear other people's perspectives and and then take them in too. Like I very much want to be parts of me want to make sure that I'm getting the full picture. And sometimes you can't get the full picture without hearing from the people that may not have a chance to speak. So,
Yeah, or don't speak. I mean, I know that I've been in groups with, 10 women and 1 man, and the man says something, and the women all just are looking down.
yeah,
And it's like, "What's happened? Why are we all being small? The guy just said whatever." You know what I mean? And I wondered about that if there's and that's not your fault, right? Like, that's not
right.
your fault, it's not our fault. It's an interesting observation.
That happens to me. That happened. Like I was one of the few male, heterosexual males in my grad school program, and I would do group therapy with a bunch of women, and I would be the only guy in the group, and they would talk about, well, men aren't shit, like, and I'm sitting there and just taking all that in, and and parts of me were also observant of like if the group leader was going to say anything about that, and sometimes they wouldn't.
Mm,
Um, and it's such a nuanced thing because now I look back and I go, like I can make sense of it. Like that another person has a very protective part of them, and they probably have experienced a lot in the hands of another man, and it makes sense to me. But it also doesn't neglect the pain that other parts of me feel when they hear that.
yeah,
Um, and that's why I say it's such a nuanced thing. I think the more that I do my inner work, though, I can tend to that myself. There's this, it's irony to me now, but people have told me that, and maybe you might not hear it with me here because I'm excited to talk to you about like this is energetic for me, but people have recently started telling me that I have like a calm, soothing voice. To the point where they're like, you should read children's books. But what comes with that is then I've even had I've even had clients come in to see me and I'm talking with them and even female clients and they'll say something like, um, you know, I'm just wondering if like you're going to be able to hold me accountable enough. Like you seem like very and and that's normally when I introduce IFS and I say that's actually not it's not my job to do. I don't say it like that. I say more of like because what most of the time happens is they want to be held accountable because they think that's what's going to move them
yeah,
forward, but they
yeah,
don't understand that really that's just a part of them and they may need something else, right?
yeah.
And so,
They also have different ideas what therapy is, I
right,
think.
exactly. I think most therapy is done from a managerial place.
Yeah,
But I say that I don't think this is also just to men, but I think everyone, people want to feel like all parts of them are going to be welcome. And that, yes, you may see this very calm part of me, or maybe it is me in the therapy session. But I think too, I try and get better of like, give some patience and let the person also feel safe enough to express all the other parts of them. And maybe it might change your perspective about them.
mm,
Because if, like I told you, it's this idea of like, go see me on the football field, you'll think he's an asshole. See me as a therapist, and you're going to think he has such a calm, soothing voice. And I've gotten better at just understanding like I'm multiple and
yeah,
that but I think that's something for everybody to kind of consider of like I know I need to do better of like parts of me that give quick snapshot judgments, right?
mhm,
Um because I think everybody just wants to feel seen for whatever they have.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Is there anything else you want to say about masculinity, men, boys, anything like that before we finish up?
I'm wondering too, like I didn't mention this, but one of the things that it was super hard for me to do was I write now. I write poetry, and that's not typically adhered to as very manly thing to do. But I remember when I started it, I yeah, I got some pushback from other guy friends of mine, like, "Oh, go write another poem," type thing. But then there was also other men that would reach out to me sporadically and like, through your writing, I've kind of realized I've got some of the same stuff going on. Um, and I'm wondering what you think. Like, I have a couple poems that I wrote down on masculinity. If you'd you'd want me to share that, okay.
Definitely. I'm
Um,
shaking my head, yes.
let me see if I can find them. So I wrote this one actually recently. The more IFS work I've done for myself, and it goes something like this. I grieve for the little boy inside me who has had his sensitivity stripped away from a system that values power over authentic expression, a
Mm,
system that is petrified of tears, as if my tears will rust away the iron chest plates this system crafted, a system that wants you to provide even at the expense of your humanity. And oh, how that little boy longs for connection. And it seems the only way he'll get it is by joining the system, only to find he may be powerful, but just as alone.
mm, I'm having
And
some feelings, yeah.
yeah, I had a lot of feelings when I wrote that one too, because I think that's a lot of little boys' experiences right
Mm,
now that they may not even have language to put, what they're
mm,
experiencing. Um,
yeah. How does it feel for you right now to share that?
I actually feel pretty good about sharing that. There was a part of me that was nervous about coming onto this podcast because this is the first time I've been talking about this, but just me doing some attending with those parts has really helped. And I'm also excited to see where this journey takes me, other men, um, and hopefully deepening connection between us and other people. Um,
Yeah, I love it.
yeah.
Mm, yeah, beautiful. Was there another one you wanted to share?
I have a few if you want me to. I guess you can you can
What?
pick and choose which ones you want. One of the things I was going to say, we didn't we didn't really touch on it, but like briefly, I sometimes wonder like how this got started with men, you
Mm,
know? And I think to myself like maybe our generations past just didn't even have the space to be vulnerable, right? Like
mm,
stuff was going on in the world that you couldn't. Like it wasn't safe to do so.
yeah.
And I wrote this poem because I think about it, especially when I look back at wars and things like that. And um, it goes, it's no wonder why us men run from our emotions. We learned from our fathers who ran from bullets, the hands of war strangling any vulnerability they had.
Yes.
And I think
Mm,
maybe even with just this generation, we've had just a little bit of space to be able to approach that, whereas other generations may not have had that.
yeah.
So yeah, so much like legacy burdens that I think we
Mm,
can all work on,
mhm.
and touch on. Um, and then the last one I have, which it goes back to the first one we kind of talked about, which is men are starving for connection with their brothers, and we are met with a paradox. What brings us together is our lack of meaning and sharing the same lie of not needing it. So
I love that. Mm.
those are the ones I've written about this, and I feel like it's been my experience, and I wonder if it's been other men's experience. I know it has.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if maybe sometimes when men hear that, they can put language to words that what they're feeling inside.
Yeah. That's great. So good. I just am so honored that you shared those with me, and just this podcast, just being vulnerable and open, and it's great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, Last question. If you weren't doing what you're doing right now and you could do anything else in the world, what would you do instead?
I, I've thought about that. Does it have to be like realistic? Like,
No, not at all.
I could see myself being in politics one day.
Is that the realistic answer or the not realistic answer?
Sometimes I wonder if that's realistic. Like, wow, president one day, that might be a part of me is like, that might be a little, you may not want that job, you know?
No,
Um,
yeah.
I don't know. I feel called to help a bunch of other people, and sometimes I feel like we need um, more information about mental health within politics, and sometimes I wonder if that is in my cards one day. Um, that I came from the business field before I was a therapist, so I could see myself, in HR or just some sort of helping profession within a large company. Um, and then there are parts of me that wonder what would have happened if I stayed with football.
Yeah.
I at one point in high school, I had to choose between either I was doing dual enrollment and playing football, and it was like one of these things has to give. And I felt like I chose the right decision, but there's always a part of me that goes, I wonder what it would be like,
Yeah.
And so yeah, if I had a magical crystal ball, that would be great to see that out too.
Yeah.
But I've reached my my body has reached the peak where that is no longer a
I-
feasible idea, which is why I asked you, does this have to be realistic or not? So
Right. Right. Since you're like in another life, in
yes,
another multiverse, I'm a NFL player.
right, yeah, yeah,
I love
yeah,
it. Well, thank you, Justin. How can people find you, and just get to know you and connect with you?
yeah, yeah. So you can find me on Instagram. It's Parts of Me Therapy, just all no spaces, no hyphens or anything. Parts of Me Therapy, and then my website is just www.partsofmetherapy.com. There's my email address on there, business phone number if anybody ever wanted to reach out and talk some more. And I hope that we can have more conversations like this. I think it's needed. So
Thank you so much.
thank you, Tammy, for everything that you do too. I was honored to be a guest on your podcast.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.